I am a capitalist. I am a pragmatic capitalist. I believe that we need a new generation of leadership in America that actively works with the private sector to build up the new industries of America, to build up small business owners, to allow us to increase home ownership, to allow people and their families to build intergenerational wealth. I believe in supporting workers.
Vice President Kamala Harris speaking last night with NBC's Spanish-language sister network, Telemundo. The interview is part of a Latino media blitz the Harris campaign recently announced, which also includes radio interviews with running mate Tim Walz and second gentleman Doug Emhoff.
So, Katty, we've heard time and time again Donald Trump talking to Spanish-speaking audiences or having ads talking about Kamala Harris being a socialist, Biden being a socialist. It's exhausting. Yesterday, the IMF reporting the United States leading the world, its economy, the envy of the world. We've talked about this before, but the Dow at record highs, the S&P 500 at record highs. Well, the United States has taken more oil from the ground this year, produced more oil than any country ever. We've got a $26 trillion GDP. Nobody else is remotely close. California has a larger GDP than all but 4 countries on the planet. Texas has a larger GDP than Russia. I could go on and on. The jobs numbers, unbelievably great over the past several years. Gas prices are plummeting, inflation going down, interest rates going down. And Kamala Harris, what's she talking about? She's not talking about 5-year plans. She's talking about tax cuts for small businesses, for entrepreneurs, for first-time home buyers, the sort of thing that lifts up the middle class and actually grows capitalism.
Yeah, I mean, not terribly socialist, right? And yet there is this sense, and I think it dates back a few years, particularly to some of the newer Hispanic immigrants who've come in from countries like Venezuela, where they really have seen socialism, and any kind of accusation or prospect that there could be a socialist leader in this country, true or not true, does resonate. I mean, why was Florida so firmly in the tank for Donald Trump? It was partly because of the Trump campaign's outreach to the Venezuelan opposition and standing up against socialism. So some of these things can work. One of the things that's been a little puzzling over the last 4 years, actually, ever since Joe Biden took back the White House, is you listen to Donald Trump in office, and I remember speaking to Republican pollsters about this. What were the things that resonated? The way he railed against political correctness and the way he talked about my stock market and how strong the stock market was. And I know that for Democrats, perhaps they feel that it is elitist to talk about how the stock market is doing well. It plays to the haves and to the have-nots rather than the have-nots. But there is something confidence-inspiring that spreads throughout the economy or throughout the public when you keep reminding people. It's like the kind of stock market is a symbol of how well the American economy is doing. And maybe there is something there, reminding Americans of exactly what you just said, Joe, time and again, every single day, how well the United States economy is doing. And it's not just the IMF saying it. Every country in Europe is looking at America with envy at the moment, saying, wow, we want that.
So, Anand Giridharadas, we heard a couple of interviews, including one with Hallie Jackson yesterday from Vice President Harris. You've been talking for a long time about Democrats needing to tell a story. And here we are with less than 2 weeks until Election Day. Kamala Harris is telling kind of a 2-track story, one about the opportunity she wants to create for Americans and also about the dangers of the other path of going back to Donald Trump. Is that the effective tactic here as we bear down on Election Day?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to understand in a larger context why she's doing some of those things that you saw in that interview. I think part of it is that, inoculation against the socialism charge. But I think there's something deeper going on that they are trying to take on, which is men, which is American men right now. A majority of American men are supporting, to our last segment, American fascism, right? And I think there is beneath the labels of socialism and capitalism and everything else, there is a deep problem in many American men's sense of themselves, fear of the future, sense that they don't quite know who they will be and how they will provide for their families and their communities in the future that's coming. I think a lot of these fears have been manufactured by places like Fox News, but some of those fears are real and based on real changes in our society, housing prices, food prices, things like that. And so what you're seeing the vice president do is answer some of that by saying, you'll be able to create wealth, you'll be able to start a business. All of that is great. I think what it doesn't quite do, that she still has, and Tim Walz has the opportunity to do in the next 2 weeks, is speak to millions of American men at that deeper, guttural level. Because again, going back to the last conversation, it doesn't so much matter that Donald Trump is selling fascism. What really matters is that roughly half of Americans, including a clear majority of American men, are buying it. The buy side is much more scary than the sell side right now. And we all focus on deploring the sale of it. But the real problem is the buying of it. People should be rejecting this or not. Most men, the average American man, is saying yes to fascism right now. Why? And so I think she needs to understand, as I'm sure her team does, that in this era of rapid change, the future feels to a lot of men, a lot of people in general, like a kind of pair of jeans that doesn't quite fit. And you have to speak to people not just in terms of economic policy, if that's the case. You have to say, hey, I see you and I recognize you. I understand the future feels bewildering. I understand you sometimes feel like you don't know what to say or you don't know quite how you're going to take care of your family. But real men don't outsource the protection of their family to dictators. Real men don't turn to fascists to solve their problems. They create things, they build things, they do things. I think men need to be invited into an aspirational picture, an aspirational story of a progress that has a place for them, too.
Very well said. Anand Giridharadas, thank you very much for coming on this morning.